Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep week 67 going with another Word Nerd Wednesday. Now, this series, I'm going to try something a little different for Word Nerd Wednesdays. Instead of trying to find a word or two in each week's readings to explore, I've opted instead for a theme across all 8 weeks. Now, thanks to longtime friend of both the PPP and TTT, Tanya P., who wrote in and suggested this topic, I'll be spending all of Series 9 looking at the names of the Valar, the Maiar, and maybe a few other places and things in Valinor if there's time. But let's start with those category words briefly, Valar and Maiar. You'll probably recognize those as plurals. The singular forms lack the R ending, so one Vala, two Valar, one Maya, two Maiar. Now, Vala is repeatedly said to mean angelic power or authority, and that is precisely what these beings have. Maya has a similar, if less authoritative meaning, angelic spirit, the beautiful. So, similar nature in that both are angelic, but the Valar also possess authority. Now, this makes sense when we recall from the Silmarillion that the Maiar are of less power and majesty and are known as the people of the Valar. But both Maiar and Valar are of the same nature, and that nature is that of the Ainur. Now, that's another plural. The singular is Ainu, which means Holy One or angelic spirit. Now, these Ainur live in Valinor, which is simply the Nora element added to Vala, with Nora meaning land, country, region where certain people live, like in Numenor. And it's related to the Ndor suffix that we see in Gondor and more. But let's get going with the names of the Valar themselves. And to give us a roadmap, we're going to start in Valaquenta from the Silmarillion. The great among these spirits, the elves name the Valar, the powers of Arda, and men have often called them gods. The lords of the Valar are 7, and the Valier, the queens of the Valar, are 7 also. Yes, we'll get to them after we spend a couple weeks with the guys. Tolkien continues, these were their names in the Elvish tongue as it was spoken in Valinor, though they have other names in the speech of the elves in Middle-earth, and their names among men are manifold. Well, you can bet we'll talk about as many of those as we can find, too. Back to the text. The names of the lords in due order are Manwe, Ulmo, Aule, Orme, Mandos, Lorien, and Tulkas. And the names of the queens are Varda, Yavanna, Nienna, Este, Vaire, Vanna, and Nessa. Melkor is counted no longer among the Valar, and his name is not spoken upon earth. Well, except here. His name is spoken here because we have to talk about the names. But he'll be last, as he should be. We're going to go in the same due order that Tolkien provides, which means starting with Manwe. And for his name, I get to cheat a bit and go back to week 51 from last August, where I actually looked at his name in the context of the letter written by Gil-galad and sent to Aldarian's father, then king of Numenor, Tar-Mineldur. Now forgive me for repeating myself, but I want to put all of this in context. Manwe's name means blessed being or blessed one, and it's an adaptation of his original Valaran name, and I'm really not sure how to pronounce this, Manawenus, which meant a bit more, blessed one closest in accord with Eru. And we get that from a very important source we're going to use for a few of these names, Appendix D of Quendi and Eldar in the War of the Jewels. Now, that WE suffix at the end of Manwe's name is something we often see in Quenya First Age names, Voronwe, Olwe, Finwe, Ingwe, and so on. It's derived from a root meaning person, being, individual. And it is typically, but not always, masculine. Now, I might take some time to do a deep dive into that element some other time, but we have a lot of names to go in only 8 weeks, so we're going to keep going. The Man element in Manwe's name is a root meaning good morally, blessed, holy, unmarred, free from evil. Now, Tolkien elaborated on this, explaining this implies that a person or thing is relatively or absolutely unmarred. That is, in Elvish thought, unaffected by the disorders introduced into Arda by Morgoth, and therefore is true to its nature and function. If applied to mind or spirit, it is more or less equivalent to morally good, but applied to bodies, it naturally refers to health and to absence of distortions, damages, blemishes, etc. Now, where else would I have found all this? But in Parma Eldalamberon number 17. Now, interestingly, Manwe's name is one of the few that never changed as Tolkien worked these languages out. It dates back to the very earliest lost tales, though the derivation was originally said to come from primitive Elvish, or he eventually decided that it came from Valaran itself. Now, Manwe has other names, right, or epithets. They include Sulimo, which is Quenya for Lord of the Breath of Arda. It literally just means breather. He also held the role of Elder King, which is Aran Ainur in Sindarin, also King of Arda or High King of Arda. Now, next up in Tolkien's due order is Ulmo. The Valaquenta tells us that he is next in might to Manwe, and that he is known as the Lord of Waters. In Tolkien's earlier writings, Ulmo was in the Quenya lexicon as a derivative of the root ulu, meaning pour or flow fast. It stayed this way all the way into the 1930s etymologies, but then in that Quendi and Eldar essay, the one in the War of the Jewels we cited earlier, Tolkien said that his name was actually derived from his Valaran name, or title really, Ulubos, and I'm sure I mispronounced that, not being a native Valaran speaker. Tolkien kept the earlier meaning as a false etymology, interestingly enough. But Ulmo wasn't always originally his name. In the Book of Lost Tales, Part 2, we learned that his gnomish name was Gulma, but was changed to Ilmir. Now, if you've ever read the poem The Horns of Ilmir, written by Tolkien back in 1914 and published in The Shaping of Middle-earth, you might remember that name. Of course, now I have to add reading The Horns of Ilmir to the list of things I want to do for First Stage Friday sometime. Now, we'll have to look at the names of Aule, Orome, and Namo, or Mandos as you might know him, next week. For now, though, folks, that's it for today's Word Nerd Wednesday. But come back next week as we wander the wide, wild, wonderful world of words weekly on Wednesdays. And if there is a word that you want to know more about, please let me know by emailing barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and more. And then join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Third Age Thursday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Follow or subscribe in your podcast apps and follow @Tolkien Times on all your social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.